Chapter 3 The Round Table Conference, 1930 to 1932, 1. Demands of Dalit leadership. At the Round Table Conference in the Government of India Act of 1919 there was a provision which read that the British government would appoint at the end of 10 years a royal commission to investigate into the working of the constitution and report upon such change as may be found necessary. 1. Consequently the Simon Commission was appointed in 1928, which was purely a parliamentary commission excluding Indian members. The Indian National Congress, therefore, opposed the commission and carried on a great agitation against it throughout the country. To assuage this feeling of opposition of the Congress, it was announced by the British government that after the work of the commission was completed, representatives from India would be assembled for a discussion before the new constitution for the country was settled. In accordance with this announcement, representative Indians were called to London at a round table conference along with the British representatives. 151 On November 12, 1930, the King George V formally inaugurated the Round Table Conference. The Round Table Conference was an event of great significance to Indians as well as to the depressed classes. Its significance lay in the recognition by the British of the right of India to be consulted in the matters of framing a constitution of India. As regards the depressed classes, they were for the first time allowed to be represented separately by their delegates. These delegates were Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and R. Srinivasan. The question arises how the depressed classes succeeded in getting representation in the Round Table Conference, a platform where the future constitution of the country was to be discussed. Indeed, the Constitution of 1919 had recognized the depressed classes as statutory minorities. Provisions related to their safety and security were embodied in it. 3 The Montage-Chelmsford Report, which preceded the Constitution of 1919, had said it in quite clear terms that the provision must be made in the Constitution for their protection. 4 Lord Birkenhead, the Secretary of State for India, delivered a speech in the House of Lords on March 30, 1927 on the appointment of statutory commission. In this speech, in it, 3 The Montage-Chelmsford Report, which preceded the Constitution of 1919, had said it in quite clear terms that the provision must be made in the Constitution classes. There is in India a vast population, even in relation to the numbers with which we are dealing, a population of 60 millions of the depressed classes. Their condition is not quite as terrible, quite as poignant as it has been in the past, but it is still terrible and poignant. They are repelled from all social intercourse. If they come between the gracious light of such an one who despised them, the sun is disfigured for that man. There are 60 millions of them in India. Am I to have a representative of them upon this commission? Never, never would I form a commission, nor would anyone in a democratic country, nor would my friends opposite recommend it. Despite this touching appeal of the seconds of state on behalf of the depressed classes, the British government did not include it in the statutory commission any Indian, including the Dalit. The commission, however, did not ignore the cause of the depressed classes. Its reported vis-a-vis depressed classes was as follows: the poverty and want of education which so widely prevent amongst them make it extremely doubtful whether a large number of adequately equipped members could be at once provided, and it is far better that they should be represented by qualified 153 spokesmen rather than by a large number of ineffectives who are only too likely to be subservient to higher castes. 6 When the commission completed its work, the government, as it promised earlier, invite the representative Indians in a round table conference for the discussion of future constitution. Among such representative Indians, the qualified spokesman on behalf of the depressed classes would also now be invited by the British at the Round Table Conference. But it should equally be remembered that it was also due to the ceaseless struggle on the part of Dalit leadership for the right
of the depressed classes, that the British government had to invite them at the Round Table Conference. The new Dalit leadership, of them Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was most prominent, enlightened, and militant, was struggling for a long time for recognition of their political demands. As we have stated earlier, they put forth their demands on the eve of the reforms of 1909 and 1919. They also presented their addresses from different places of country to the Prince of Wales, who visited India in 1925. When the Soman Commission visited India in 1928, they again submitted their evidences to him. Further, they convinced many depressed class conferences at different places of the country, e.g. Bombay, Nasik, 154 Madras etc. in 1929 and early 1930, in which they put forth their demands, very strongly by passing strong resolutions. Most significant among these conferences was Nasik Conference, held under the presidency of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which called not only for separate rights of the depressed classes but also independence for India. 7. By their witnesses, addresses, evidences and resolutions they always demanded for separate representation and separate rights for them. The selection of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar from Bombay and R. Srinivasan from Madras as qualified spokesman on behalf of the depressed classes at the Round Table Conference was the result of all this political action on the party of depressed classes. It should be remembered that the Congress leaders
boycotted the Round Table Conference and launched a civil disobedience movement against the British. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi began
satyagraha, which ended by a jail sentence to him. The other leaders of the Congress, however, continued the civil disobedience campaign, which ended only in 1931 after the conclusion of well-known Gandhi-Irwin Pact. The first session of the Round Table Conference began in November 1930 at London. In this very session Dr. B.R. Ambedkar put forth the cause of depressed classes as well as their position on 155 Indian matters clearly and seriously. In this session Dr. Ambedkar greatly emphasized on Dalit demands, which only due to the huge pressure of the awakened Dalit people of India, and the demands which he raised were actually the demands of common enlightened dates. As we have witnessed earlier, before 1930 a common conscience had emerged among the politically awakened Dalits on the demand of their separate representation and separate rights. In this way Dr. Ambedkar, who demanded either separate electorates or reservation of seats with adult suffrage before the Simon Commission, now emphasized only on the demand of separate electorates. In the first session of the Round Table Conference, he made a powerful introduction of the Dalit demands. He spoke on behalf of the depressed classes of India in the fifth sitting of the Round Table Conference on November 20, 1932. Put the point of view of depressed classes, the point of view I will try to put as briefly as I can. It is that the bureaucratic form of government in India should be replaced by a government which will be the government of the people, by the people and for the people. This statement of the view of the depressed people, I am sure will be received with surprises in some quarters. We have judged the existing administration solely in the light of our own circumstances, and we have found it 156 wanting. 9. This was a surprise to the Congress, who believed that depressed classes leaders were anti-national. He again surprised the Congress as well as the British by attacking the British Raj in the following words: "The government of India does not realize that the landlords are squeezing the masses dry and that the capitalists are not giving the laborers a living wage and decent conditions of work. Yet it is a most painful thing that it had not dared to touch any of these evils. Why? The reason why it does not intervene is because it is afraid that its intervention to amend the existing code of social and economic life will give rise to resistance of what good is such a government to anybody. We feel that nobody can remove our grievances as well as we can, and we cannot remove them unless we get political power in our own hands. No share of this political power can evidently come to us so long as the British government remains as it is. It is only the Swaraj Constitution that we stand any chance of getting the political power in our own hands, without which we cannot bring salvation to our people. We know that political power is passing from the British into the hands of those who wield such tremendous economic, social, and religious five-way over our existence. We are willing that it may happen, though the idea of Swaraj recalls to the mind of many the tyrannies. 157 oppressions and injustices practiced upon us in the past. Point 10. The above remarks of Dr. Ambedkar against the British and for the Swaraj are answer to historians like Arun Shaur, who uttered that he was a pro-British and anti-nationalist leader. Point 11. In his introductory speech, Dr. Ambedkar emphasized chiefly on 2 points. Firstly, depressed classes were totally with their countrymen on the demand of independence from the British rule. Secondly, the Dalit problem was mainly a political problem, which could be talked only politically. The second point was never accepted by the Congress. They only described this problem as a social problem. Actually, the political recognition of the problem would mean the recognition of the separate political rights of the depressed classes. This was not acceptable to the Congress, and it would challenge the political hegemony of the Congress as well as the caste Hindu in the country. But to the viewpoint of the depressed classes, the political recognition of the problem was a question great significance, because, by only this their representation could be ensured in the future elections and legislatures. Dr. Ambedkar stressed very forcefully on this aspect. We are often reminded that the problem of the depressed classes is a social problem and that its solution lies elsewhere than in politics. We take strong exception to this view. We 158 hold that the problem of depressed classes will never be solved 10 unless they get political power in their own hands. During the same session, Dr. Ambedkar then submitted a scheme of political safeguards to the Minorities Committee for the Protection of the Depressed Classes in the future Constitution of India. He described these political safeguards necessary for the protection of the depressed classes. This scheme presented the main terms and conditions on which the depressed classes would consent to place themselves under a majority rule in a self-governing India. 13. These terms and conditions were briefly as follows. Condition I: equal citizenship and fundamental rights. Condition 2: free enjoyment of equal rights. 1. Offense of boycott defined. 2. Punishment for boycotting. 3. Punishment for instigating or promoting a boycott. 4. Punishment for threatening a boycott. Condition 3: protection against discrimination. Condition 4: adequate representation in the legislatures. Condition V: adequate representation in the services. Condition 6 Redress against prejudicial action or neglect of interests. Condition 7 Special departmental care. 159 Condition 8 Depressed classes and the Cabinet. Point 14 Needless to say that all above terms and conditions presented by Dr. Ambedkar at the Round Table Conference on the part of the depressed classes included near about all the demands raised by political awakened Dalits in different parts of India. Dr. Ambedkar's role at the Round Table Conference was only to raise systematically and strongly these subaltern aspirations of the common depressed classes. But to get recognition of these demands, particularly on the part of the Congress, was not an easy task. The Minorities Committee discussed all Dalit demands and recognized many to them. The committee submitted its report to the Round Table Conference, which read regarding the depressed classes as follows: they should be deducted from the Hindu population and be regarded for electoral purposes as a separate community. 13 It should be noticed that although agreements on details was lacking, in the first session of the Round Table Conference, it was unanimously accepted that the depressed classes were entitled to recognition as a separate entity for political and constitutional purposes. 162. Confrontation between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. The first Round Table Conference, 1931. Was followed by the calling off of the civil disobedience movement and the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, leading to the appearance of Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Round Table Conference. The ground for preparation of the Congress to participate in the Round Table Conference was prepared through a series of meetings between Mahatma Gandhi and the Viceroy Lord Irwin, which resulted there in the settlement in March 1931. In Karachi session of the Congress in 1931, his understanding with the Viceroy was endorsed and he was chosen as the sole representative of the Congress to the Second Round Table Conference. At the Working Committee meeting held in July 1931, a resolution was adopted by the Congress on their future stand at the Round Table Conference on the question of communal problem and separate electorates. Historians like K. Santhanam and Ravindra Kumar have argued that Gandhiji Bhai was bound to this resolution to take a stand against separate electorates. Point 16 The text of this resolution read as follows: 3a. Joint electorates shall form the basis of representation in the future Constitution of India. 161. b. For the Hindus in Sindh, the Muslims in Assam, and the Sikhs in Punjab and NWFP, and for the Hindus and Muslims in any province where they are less than 25% of the total population, seats shall be reserved in the federal and provincial legislature on the basis of population with the right to contest additional seats. 17 This resolution was the result of the influence of so-called socialist leaders of the Congress, whom neither the communal problem nor untouchability were problem at all. That is why the Karachi resolution did not even mention untouchability. But even then the above resolution was never strictly followed by Mahatma at the Round Table Conference vis-a-vis minorities and the depressed classes, and he finally agreed to accept their demands of separate representation. But as regards the depressed classes, he was even not ready to give them reservation of seats with joint electorates. He adopted an obstinate attitude against the depressed classes' demands, which resulted in ironic and tragic development at the Round Table Conference. The Second Conference and later on the Ramsay MacDonald Award developed into, of all things, a confrontation between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. In between the two conferences, Dr. Ambedkar met with Mahatma Gandhi at London in August 1931. According to B.C. Campbell's description, quoted by Gail Omvid, Mahatma Gandhi (162) treated Drive Ambedkar with a lack of even normal politeness, while Dr. Ambedkar responded with a criticism of the Congress walking out with the famous statement, "Mahatmaji, I have no homeland." 19 It was hoped at the time of the Congress advent at the Round Table Conference that it would contribute to the solution of many problems confronting the conference. The Friends of Congress were saying that if the first session did not produce an agreement, it was because of the absence of the Congress. Everybody was, therefore, looking forward to the Congress to lead the conference to a success. The second session of the Round Table Conference opened on September 7, 1931. During this session, the attitude of Mahatma Gandhi, who always presented himself as a man full of humanity, was very uneven regarding the demands of the downtrodden. Even his very first speech in the conference, he vehemently opposed the Dalit demands. His opposition to the depressed classes' demands was perhaps due to his personal bias with Dr. Ambedkar, which grew probably after their recent meeting at London. During this session, he even challenged the Dalit leaders that they were nobodies and he alone, as the delegate of the Congress, represented the all classes of the country, including the depressed classes. 20. 163 In the second setting of the Federal Structure Committee on September 17, 1931, his remarks on Dalit demands were as follows: the Congress has reconciled itself to the special treatment of the Hindu-Muslim-Sikh tangle. But the Congress will not extend this doctrine in any other shape or form. The interests of the depressed classes, are as clear to the Congress as the interest of any other body or any other individual throughout the length and breadth of India. Therefore, I would most strongly resist any further special representation. 21 The logic of the Gandhi/suppress for this stand need objective analysis. Dr. Ambedkar described this attitude of the Mahatma as a declaration of war by Mr. Gandhi and the Congress against the untouchables. 22 Dr. Ambedkar has pointed out in his book that Mahatma Gandhi, who was totally against any political representation of the depressed classes, wanted to bypass the depressed classes and to close the minorities' problem by bringing about a settlement between three parties, the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs. He had been even carrying on negotiations privately with the Muslims, but evidently they had not been concluded due to the alert intervention of Dr. Ambedkar. 23. 165 Heads is an act of self-restraint on his part. He is totally so much saturated with suspicion that he cannot see anything, or he sees in every Hindu a determined opponent of the untouchables, and it is quite natural. 31 Actually, Mahatma Gandhi was of the view that the depressed classes should behave according to his ages and perception and not independently according to their own desire. That's why, giving answer to a question that communities all the overworld insist on being represented by their own people, he insistently repeated his claim to represent the depressed classes at the Round Table Conference. He repeated his viewpoint again and again. The matter was then discussed in the meeting of Minorities Committee. This committee met on October 8, 1931, in which Mahatma Gandhi again questioned the nominated members at the Round Table Conference, where Dalit leaders were also included. 32 At this, Dr. Ambedkar criticized him by claiming that, "I have not the slightest doubt that even if the depressed classes of India were given the chance of electing their representative to this conference, I would, all the same, find a place here." 33 He also presented in evidence a resolution of the Depressed Classes Union, against the Congress claim to represent the depressed classes. 34 166 The confrontation between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar was becoming more and more serious. The Prime Minister in his concluding observations suggested the minorities to reach on any agreement. Acting on the suggestion of the Prime Minister, the minorities tried and reached on a settlement which was submitted to the Prime Minister on November 12, 1931. This settlement was known as Minorities Pact. It was put forward jointly by the Muslims, the depressed classes, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Europeans, demanding inter alia that these communities shall have representation in all legislatures through separate electorates. With regards to the depressed classes, no change to joint electorates shall be made until after 20 years. 36 This settlement was signed by Aga Khan, Dr. Ambedkar Paneerselvam, Henry Gidney, and Ambedkar. There were two parts of this settlement, firstly the common claims of all minorities and secondly, the special claims of different minorities. As regards the special claims of the depressed classes accepted in this settlement, they read as a. The Constitution shall declare invalid any custom or use, by which any penalty or disadvantage, or disability is imposed upon or any discrimination is made against any subject of the state in regard to the enjoyment of the civil rights on account of untouchability. 167b. Generous treatment in the matter of recruitment to public services and the opening of enlistment in the police and military service. c. The depressed classes in the Punjab shall have the benefit of the Punjab Land Alienation Act extended to them. d. Right of appeal shall lie to the Governor or Governor-General for redress of prejudicial action or neglect of interest by any executive authority. 167b. Generous treatment in the matter of recruitment not less than set forth in the Annexure. In the Annexure, entitled Representation in Legislature, the depressed classes were provided seats in Centre, Upper House, 20 out of 200, in Centre, Lower House, 45 out of 300, in Assam 13 out of 100, in Bengal 35 out of 200, in Bihar and Orissa 14 out of 100, in Bombay 28 out of 200, in CP 20 out of 100, in Madras 40 out of 200, in Punjab 10 out of 100 and in UP 20 out of 100.39. This settlement indicated that the Dalit leaders were worried not merely about the political representation of the depressed classes but equally about their civil, social, and economic rights. On November 13, 1931, the next meeting of the Minorities Committee took place. In this meeting Aga Khan, the 168 Muslim delegate, presented the document of the Minorities Pact, stating, "This agreement has been arrived at after careful and anxious consideration. All parts of the agreement are interdependent and agreements stand or fall as a whole." 40. The Minorities Pact was merely a mutual agreement among the minorities, it was not a statutory agreement at all. This was just a scheme agreed at by the minorities for the solution of question of communal representation. Mahatma Gandhi himself had been carrying on negotiations privately with the Muslims before the Minorities Committee met, which evidently had not been concluded. 41 But Mahatmaji now responded to the Minorities Pact very furiously. His reservations on the pact were not due to the reason that his consent was not sought before the conclusion of this settlement. He was particularly unhappy for the recognition given to the political claims of the depressed classes in this agreement. He said, "The Congress will always accept any solution that may be acceptable to the Hindus, the Muhammadans, and he Sikhs. The Congress will be no party to the special electorate for any other minorities." 42 Then he clearly put his standpoint to the depressed classes' claims. One word more as to the so-called untouchables. One can understand the claims advanced by the other minorities, but the 169 claims advanced on behalf of the untouchables, that time, is the unkindest cut of all. It means the perpetual bar sinister. I would not sell the vital interests of the untouchables even for the sake of winning the freedom of India. I claim myself in my own person to represent the vast masses of the untouchables. 43 In this way Gandhiji once again reiterated his stand on the Dalit question and assessed his claim to be the well-wisher of the depressed classes. He then openly attacked Dr. Ambedkar. With all my regard for Dr. Ambedkar, I must say in all humility that here the great wrong under which he has labored and perhaps the better experiences that he had undergone have for the moment warped his judgment. It hurts me to have to say this, but I would be untrue